what if the Chargers drafted Michael Vick? This was the original theory I was going to do back in November, but unfortunately I had to do a whole bunch of re-edits to it because it was not really good quality, so I went and did the Eli one with the Chargers instead. But of course, this is the first now of two theories, funny enough, since I wasn't planned to have them back-to-back, but now it's going to be involving Vick. But this one, of course, is what if he was drafted by the Chargers. So let's get into it. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if? An NFL theory. Heading into the 2001 draft, the Chargers were in a really bad spot. 1-15 in 2000, worst run offense of all time in the 16-game schedule, and Ryan Leaf completely busted out. They needed a massive rebuild. But with the number 1 overall pick, you'd think they have a good opportunity to do so. But instead of using that number 1 overall pick to maybe get a player for the future, they actually traded to the Falcons, who used that pick to get Michael Vick. The Chargers, of course, with the now 5th overall pick, they drafted LT, who become a franchise player for them for almost the rest of the decade. And of course, in the second round, they would get Drew Brees, who, unbeknownst to them, would eventually become a Hall of Famer, just not with the Chargers, unfortunately. Meanwhile, Vick, as the number 1 overall pick, he would become one of the main players in the league in the 2000s, and being the main franchise player of the Falcons. But in 2007, he would go to prison for dogfighting. After he got out in 2009, the Falcons let him go. He signed with the Eagles. He had a resurgent career in 2010 before really fading out. And after 2015, he was done. But would that all change? Could his career maybe be different with the Chargers possibly? And maybe the Chargers' fortunes could change. I guess we'll have to wait and see. So here we go into the theory itself. So it's the 2001 draft, and in this timeline, the Chargers do not make the trade with the Falcons. So with the number 1 overall pick, they take Michael Vick instead. So now, of course, there's 3 things we gotta wonder about. 1, what happens with LT? Since the Chargers just drafted Michael Vick, they have no real way to get back high enough of a pick in order to get him. Well, after looking at the draft closely, every team's needs, he would be drafted by the Bears, who needed a running back really badly. So now they got an even better running back instead of drafting Anthony Thomas in the 2nd round. The next question is, what happens with the Falcons? Well, we're going to have to go to our next question. What happens with Drew Brees? Well, since the Falcons now have Vick, they have no reason to draft Drew Brees. But guess who does need a quarterback still? The Falcons. And guess what? In this scenario, yep, the Falcons would draft Drew Brees, as he's the only other real good quarterback left in that draft that was able to get. And since they couldn't get Vick, they get him instead. But nothing would change in the 2001 season. Everyone would still have the same records. Vick would have some starts with the Chargers, show some promise. Drew Brees would have some starts with the Falcons, show some hopeful promise. And of course, LT would light up the Bears offense and give them a much bigger punch, but it wouldn't make a difference in the playoffs. We then go into 2002, as we start with the Chargers, of course. Michael Vick had a really good season that year, especially compared to Drew Brees, but there's one major flaw. They don't have LT. And as good as Vick was at running, he was not LT, and he does not get anywhere near the productions and touchdowns. So because of that, despite having a better quarterback, the Chargers still finished the same 8-8 record that they did in real life. Then for the Bears, they would play much better with LT, but unfortunately for them, they would still have their massive regression as they regressed to 6-10. And for the Falcons, unfortunately for them, Drew Brees becomes the full starter for the team. He plays okay, but he was nowhere near as good as Michael Vick, and plus, he can't run for shit. So unfortunately for the Falcons, instead of making the playoffs, they finished the exact same 7-9 record that they did in 2001. So in the updated 2002 standings, in the AFC, the Steelers now got the number 2 seed as the Titans fall to the 3rd seed, and the Broncos managed to sneak into the playoffs as the 6th seed. And in the NFC, the Saints now get the 5th seed, but other than that, nothing changes. But in the end, with some different matchups, I don't think anything changes, as it'll still be the Buccaneers beating the Raiders in the Super Bowl. We then head into 2003. After having a 500 record, the Chargers hoped to make the playoffs in 2003, but unfortunately for them, Vick would suffer his injury in the preseason, and he would miss the first 12 weeks of the season. He would come back, but unfortunately by then it was too late for the Chargers, as they regress and finish 5-11. Of course, doesn't help the fact that they don't have LT. Meanwhile, for the Bears, they play a little bit better. Their offense plays better, as LT has another really good year as they improve to 8-8. Meanwhile, for the Falcons, oh god, screw not having Michael Vick in this timeline. Drew Brees was really, really bad. In fact, since he was nowhere near as good as Michael Vick was near the end of the year, the Falcons regress even worse than they were in real life 2003, as they regressed to 4-12, the same record they were before they drafted Brees after 2000. But in the updated 2003 stands, the only thing that changes is the Vikings now win the NFC North over the Packers, who missed the playoffs. But in the end, I think the Vikings would be just like the Packers, play like them, beat the Seahawks, but lose to the Eagles. So with that, the playoffs remain the same, as the Patriots beat the Panthers, still in the Super Bowl. We now get into 2004, as there's a lot of things changing in this year. First off, after the season ended, the Falcons cut Drew Brees. After 3 disappointing seasons, they think it's time for a change, especially since they have a high enough pick where they can get one of the 4 quarterbacks that are eligible in the 2004 draft. And speaking of which, the 2004 draft changes around now, as the Raiders now have the number 1 overall pick. And of course, they would take Eli. And like I said in the previous video, I think Eli would probably play with the Raiders without no problem. And of course, with the next pick, it would be the Giants who would take Big Ben now. And with the 3rd quarterback pick, it would be the Falcons who would take Phillip Rivers. Incredible. But then the question comes to our mind. What would happen with the Steelers? They can't get Big Ben anymore, and they can't get the quarterback they wanted in Phillip Rivers. They're still J.P. Losman, but I don't think they would actually get him and probably focus on someone else. But they decided to take a big gamble. They actually would sign Drew Brees in free agency. Oh boy, yep, they would sign him in free agency. He wouldn't be a starter at first as a backup, but unbeknownst to them, something incredible would happen. And it would be an incredible moment that the Falcons wish they could take back. Into the 2004 season, with Michael Vick back healthy, the Chargers have a massive rebound season as they improve to 9-7 and getting their first winning season in 9 years. Meanwhile, unfortunately for the Bears, their offense continues to struggle even though LT has a really good year. Their defense holds on though, as they have a really strange record as they end up finishing 6-8-2. And then we get to the Falcons, of course. Phillip Rivers, remember, in 2004 was Drew Brees' backup, so he did not play at all. And we have no idea what his stats would be. But as I said in my previous video, I think he would be right in the middle between Big Ben and Eli. Remember, Big Ben had that really good rookie year. Eli was really bad, so he'd probably be an average quarterback in 2004. Which, unfortunately for the Eagles, it's good enough to improve, but it's not good enough to make the playoffs, as they only improved to 7-9. Meanwhile, for our other 2 teams with their quarterbacks, Eli would eventually start early on in the season, but the Raiders don't improve as they finish 4-12 still. And the Giants, after 5-4, they put Big Ben in, and he would play really good and help the Giants turn around as they finish 8-7-1. But the big surprise would be the Steelers. After starting off 1-1, Drew Brees would become the starter from Tommy Maddox, and oh my goodness, he would light up that Steelers offense just as good as Big Ben. holy crap, it made a massive difference as he would become comeback player of the year as the Steelers went to 12-4 with not only the #1 defense in the league, but a really scary offense as the league is stunned by how well Drew Brees handles this offense. Which then leads to our updated 2004 playoff stands. In the AFC, the Patriots and Steelers swap places. The Patriots now have the home field advantage. The Steelers fall to the 2nd seed. The Broncos make the playoffs with the AFC West as they're the 3rd seed. The Colts fall to number 4. The Jaguars make the playoffs as the 5th seed. And the Chargers manage to make the playoffs as the 6th seed. Meanwhile, in the NFC, the Packers get first round bye as the 2nd seed. And the Panthers manage to get into the playoffs as the 4th seed, as the Seahawks move up to the 3rd seed. The Saints get into the playoffs as the 5th seed, and the Giants manage to get in as the 6th seed. Oh boy, what a lot of changes would it make. First off, in the wild card, it would be a Giants at the Seahawks. As I said before, I think the Giants would win this game. And the Panthers hosting the Saints. The Saints were on the roll, although they were still a really bad team, and they did beat the Panthers the season finale, but I think the Panthers would get the revenge as they were on a roll too and get the win. And the AFC side, the Jaguars would visit the Colts, but the Colts would dismantle the Jaguars, and then it would be the Chargers at the Broncos as Michael Vick finally makes his playoff debut, but unfortunately, on the road against a good Broncos team, and more importantly, without LT, the Chargers are just not enough to handle the Broncos as the Broncos get the win. And then in the divisional round, as the Giants visit the Eagles, the Giants would of course get destroyed by the Eagles. And then in the divisional round 2, the Panthers visit the Packers, and in an upset, the Panthers beat the Packers on the road as Favre has a terrible game as they make it back to the conference championship. Meanwhile, in the AFC divisional round, the Broncos visit the Steelers, and the Steelers in an offensive shootout would beat the Broncos, which sets up our conference championships. First off, the Panthers at Eagles in a rematch from last year's conference championship, but the Eagles would get the revenge and make it. And then it would be the AFC Championship Steelers at Patriots, which is a rematch, which is a matchup of the real life conference championship, only it's at the Patriots now instead of the Steelers. Now, of course, the Patriots destroyed the Steelers in the conference championship, but there's one reason why they did that. Big Ben threw 3 turnovers. He threw 3 picks, I mean to say. And all of them led to points. 17 in total. But guess what? I don't think Drew Brees is going to throw all those turnovers. Most certainly not getting points. And he would play just good enough that I think in an upset, the Steelers beat the Patriots in Foxborough. And they are headed to the Super Bowl. So Super Bowl 39 is the all-Pennsylvania matchup. Steelers and Eagles. Remember, the Steelers destroyed the Eagles in the regular season and gave them their first loss in the year, just like the Patriots. But now, with the better quarterback too, and the #1 defense, which the Patriots didn't have, I think the Steelers will beat the Eagles just as well as they got their first title since 1979. And Drew Brees would stun the league. In 1 year, he went from a bust quarterback to a Super Bowl champion leading an elite offense. Unbelievable, and the Falcons would be hitting themselves so hard for that incredible miss. It's now 2005 as the Chargers, after making the playoffs, hope to make it back this year, but unfortunately, Vick stumbles a bit and is not as good as he was last year. But of course, the main reason, no LT, as the Chargers regress to finish 7-9. And then the Bears have the #1 defense in the league and rebound massively with LT having a massive improvement for the offense. But of course, they finish with a very weird record at 10-4-2. Meanwhile, for the Falcons, once again, Phillip Rivers does not play this year, so we have no idea what his stats would be. I think he would probably be right in the middle between Big Ben and Eli, probably. And that would be enough for the Falcons to prove to 9-7. But of course, everyone would have their eyes on the Steelers as they try to repeat. And they have a really strong offense. And Drew Brees, after struggling a little bit the first part of the year, manages to recover and have a really good season. But unfortunately for him and the Steelers, he would suffer his shoulder injury the final week of the season, knocking him out of the playoffs, meaning the Steelers are going to have to limp into the playoffs to defend their title, but they improve to 13-3. Which, in our updated 2005 stands, the Steelers and Bangles swap places as the Steelers now win the AFC North and the Bengals are the 6th seed. And in the NFC, the Redskins end up winning the NFC East as the Cowboys managed to make the playoffs as the 6th seed. So then the playoffs would begin in the AFC side. Bengals at Steelers. Remember, these two played each other in real life, and the Bengals, Carson Palmer was knocked out of the game with his injury, which would happen here too. And remember, the Bengals had that 17-7 lead, but until the Steelers went out to win it. Now, of course, the Steelers also don't have Drew Brees. They have Charlie Batch as their backup. How would they play? Well, look at how Joe Kitna did and how Big Ben played in comparison. I think the Steelers would do just enough to hold on and get the win. And then in the divisional round, they visit the Broncos like they did in the AFC Championship. But in that game, remember, the Broncos lost that because Jake Plummer had so many interceptions and turnovers that it just gave so many points to the Steelers defense. And Big Ben, I think, played just okay in that game, which is good enough for Charlie Batch. And guess what? The Steelers, without Drew Brees, would make it back to the AFC Championship as they beat the Broncos, which sets up our AFC Championship, Steelers at the Colts. Of course, remember the Steelers beat the Colts as they spanked them. The Colts made the comeback, but of course, Vinder Jack missed the field goal. Oh God, I had to do I actually went score by score to see how close this would be, because this game would be very close. The Steelers would go up early like they did, but they wouldn't get the extra touchdown that Big Ben threw in that game, leaving it just close enough for the Colts. And near the end of the game, the Colts would take the lead, unlike the within a score like they did in our timeline. And then when they get the fumble recovery, it's to seal the game instead of worrying about the missed field goal. So the Colts hold on this time around, and they are headed to the Super Bowl, which makes Super Bowl 40 now the Colts and the Seahawks. They played each other in Week 16, and the Seahawks pretty much spanked the Colts, but that was because the Colts rested their starters, remember, so they didn't really have anything to play for. And of course, how would they play in this game? Well, the Colts had an elite offense. Same goes for Seahawks, so this would be an offensive shootout probably. But the Seahawks kind of struggled in that game too, and the Colts had a pretty good defense in that game that year too. So I think it's possible that the Colts probably would play just as well, if not maybe better than the Steelers. So if that's the case, it would be the Colts beating the Seahawks this time around. We then get into 2006, as we have to start off, of course, with the Saints, since the Steelers now have Drew Brees, and of course, he just got them to the Super Bowl, and they almost made it back without him. He's going to stay with the Steelers. They've re-signed him. So, of course, now the Saints don't have Drew Brees, so now they draft Vince Young. Meanwhile, the Titans, of course, like I said in my timeline, since now they can't get Vince Young, they keep the Steve McNair instead of trading him to the Ravens. Although I don't think it would change anything for the Ravens. We then get in the 2006 season. As remember, the Chargers in 2006 had the #1 record in the league, 14-2, #1 offense in the league, and LT had that incredible MVP season, 31 touchdowns in total, 28 rushing touchdowns. Very good, but of course, remember, the Chargers don't have LT in this scenario. So because of that, they don't get the offensive production that he produced. And Vick, although he rushes for 1,000 yards, he's just honestly not as good as Phillip Rivers was this year. And it's going to really hurt the Chargers badly, as the Chargers have a massive regression, as instead of going 14-2, they finished 5-11. Meanwhile, for the Falcons, now we know how Phillip Rivers played this year, and he played better than Vick. But unfortunately for him, it didn't really matter that much in the games that the Falcons played in, because they got blew out in a bunch of them too. But the Falcons still do improve to 8-7-1 at least. And then the Steelers, with Drew Brees back, have a really good offensive performance from him, because remember, Big Ben had a terrible season that year, but with him out of the way, now they got Drew Brees, who's even better, and the Steelers, despite their regression, still make it back into the playoffs at 11-5. Which in our updated 2006 standings, the Colts now have the #1 seed in the AFC, the Ravens fall to #2, Patriots move up to #3, the Broncos win the AFC West as the 4th seed, Steelers get in as the 5th seed, and the Bengals get in as the 6th seed. And in the NFC, the Eagles now get the #2 seed, as the Seahawks move up to the 3rd seed. The Falcons end up winning the NFC South as the 4th seed, and the Packers get in as the 6th seed. But the main focus in the playoffs would be on the AFC side, as it would be the Breeze-led Steelers going into the Broncos. Of course, the Broncos had a massive collapse near the end of the year. They were 7-2 and they finished 9-7, so the Steelers, I think, would easily get this win. And then it would be the Steelers at the Colts, the AFC Championship rematch in the divisional round. And, of course, remember, during the playoffs, the Colts had an elite run defense. That was an incredible season. But Peyton struggled in the playoffs. In fact, in the real-life divisional round when the Colts beat the Ravens, he was bad. Really bad. And now he's got to go up against another really good defense in the Steelers. Added in, too, with an elite quarterback in Breeze now playing. This time around, I think the Steelers are going to get the revenge and beat the Colts. Which has our AFC Championship now. Steelers at the Ravens. The #1 defense going up against a strong Steelers team. And it would be very scary for the Ravens. But I think with the #1 defense, and of course remember too, they swept the Steelers that season. And they destroyed Drew Brees on the road too when they played him earlier in the year. I think the Ravens, despite not having Steve McNair, would hold on and stop the Steelers from making it back to the Super Bowl. So Super Bowl 41 is now the Ravens and the Bears. Now, of course, I've had this matchup before. Normally, I would have the Ravens win this one because they had the #1 defense. Bears were #2, but of course, their defense was struggling. Of course, their offense was really bad. But remember now, the Bears, who are now 14-2 instead of 13-3, they have LT. They have the MVP in the league. They finally broke through, and they have an offensive juggernaut, at least, in terms of the running game. And even if Rex Grossman struggles, and even if LT is not as good as he probably needs to be, I think he could do just enough that this time around, the Bears win it this time instead, and get their first title in 21 years. And thank you, Aaron, too, for the screenshot. And that's where this theory will leave off at. Of course, remember in 2007, Vick would still go to prison, but after the terrible season they had, and of course not really being the franchise player with the Chargers, and of course the Chargers playing so much worse this time around, I think the Chargers would just release Vick after 2006. The Bears don't change much, but of course they got their Super Bowl title, so that's good enough for them, and they still got LT playing a really good performance at least for the next 2 years. And now that the Falcons actually have a really good quarterback in Phillip Rivers, they don't collapse like they do in 2007 when Vick went to prison. And of course, since they're going to play much better in 2007, that means no Matt Ryan for them, so that'll really make everything interesting next year. And then, of course, you have the shakeups with Eli with the Raiders, Big Ben with the Giants, and of course the Saints not having Drew Brees, so they're going to really struggle. But of course, the big difference, and a massive difference coming up in the next 5 years, if I continue on this theory, is going to be the Steelers with Drew Brees. Can you imagine 2008, 5,000 passing yards, #1 defense in the league, and all that other stuff coming up? Oh God, the Steelers are going to be so scary in the next coming years. And of course, it would be an amazing theory. How much would it be in the future if I come back to this? What if the Falcons did not let Brees go? Oh my goodness, that's incredible. But hey, it's just a theory. An NFL theory. Thanks for watching. Oh, it's nice to finally get this theory done after it has been delayed for 4 months. As next time out will be another Michael Vick theory that was not planned to be in order, but it's going to be an interesting one nonetheless. So see you guys for that one.